Set in 1940s Australia, a group of thieves has just robbed one of the largest banks in the region. During their escape, their car crashes into a large boulder in the middle of the road, scattering boxes of gold across the ground. Tension rises as the young driver is blamed for the accident. The leader, Dylan, orders the conductor to take over the wheel. Moments later, disaster strikes again. The car swerves out of control and plunges into a nearby river, taking dozens of gold bars with it. The young driver and the conductor manage to escape, but Dylan sees the crash as unforgivable. He instructs his associate, Janusz, to deal with the conductor. Soon after, the man's lifeless body is tossed into the river. As the body sank beneath the dark current, something else stirred in the depths below. This is fear below. With no advanced machinery available at the time, the thieves have no choice but to recover the gold manually. They decide to set up camp near the river for the night to guard the remaining cargo. As they rest, the river remains calm until the conductor's body resurfaces. Then, without warning, something drags it down into the dark water. The focus shifts to a diver named Jimmy and his partner Clara. Their diving business has been slow, leaving them without income. Desperate for work, Clara visits their manager, Morgan, hoping for a new contract. Morgan tells her there are no new clients, but suggests she and Jimmy repair some unused winch equipment in the warehouse. Soon, two strangers arrive at the workshop. They are Dylan and his companion. Without delay, Dylan requests a private meeting with Morgan. He explains that his cargo truck accidentally fell into the river the previous night, not far from their location. He needs divers to recover the lost load and offers an advance payment up front. Dylan insists the job remain secret. No one is to ask questions about the cargo, and no diving permits should be filed. If the team stays quiet, he promises a generous bonus once the work is complete. At first, Morgan hesitates, worried about the risks of an unlicensed dive. But the payment is too tempting. It is enough to buy a 200-horsepower diesel boat for future expeditions. Weighing the reward against the risk, he agrees and starts organizing the operation. Before the team departed, Morgan warned Clara and Jimmy not to ask questions about their clients or the job. Trust was irrelevant. What mattered was finishing the work and getting paid. The next morning, they arrived at the river where the car had sunk. Morgan introduced his two assistants to Dylan, who immediately questioned Clara's presence, doubting her ability because she was a woman. Morgan quickly shut him down, assuring him that both Clara and Jimmy were experienced divers capable of handling the job. As Dylan and his companion stood guard around the site, Morgan began unloading the diving gear, including a manual oxygen pump. Clara and Jimmy suited up while Morgan took position at the winch, ready to operate the cable system from above. After several minutes of searching underwater, the divers located the submerged car. They signaled to Morgan and confirmed that the boxes in the trunk were still intact. The next task was to pull them out and lift them to the surface. Since the trunk was locked, Morgan prepared to use the hooked cable to force it open. Before they could start, something large moved behind Clara and struck her with force.
What was it?
I didn't see. It just came out of nowhere.
The water was dark, and she couldn't see what hit her. Within moments, a massive bull shark appeared and bit down on her helmet, snapping the oxygen hose. Jimmy spotted her sinking and rushed to help, finding her unconscious and out of air.
I'm tracking it.
Morgan quickly turned the winch to haul her up, while Dylan watched without showing any concern. Later, Jimmy recovered a tooth fragment that confirmed the attacker was a bull shark, a species known to survive in both saltwater and freshwater. Dylan, still fixated on recovering his cargo, demanded that Morgan resume the dive. Morgan refused, explaining that returning to the water would be suicidal unless the shark was eliminated first. By late afternoon, Dylan returned from town claiming he had found a fisherman experienced in hunting large predators. Since night was approaching, they agreed to wait until morning before resuming operations. As darkness fell, the group gathered around the fire, sharing drinks to ease the tension. During the conversation, Clara asked Dylan about the contents of the boxes. He replied calmly, saying they contained cosmetic products for his company. Clara did not believe him. She later spoke privately with Morgan and urged him to call off the contract. But despite her warning, Morgan decided to continue the job, driven by the promise of payment they could not afford to lose. The next morning, as the crew prepared to resume work, a police officer arrived at the campsite. He said he had received a report about a sunken car and questioned why it had not been reported sooner. Morgan tried to explain, but Dylan stepped in, claiming they wanted to avoid troubling the local authorities and that no one had been injured. After a short exchange, The officer gave a warning to stay cautious while working in the river, then left. Soon after, the fisherman Dylan had hired arrived. He introduced himself as Bob and laid out his plan to lure and shoot the shark once it surfaced. However, 2 of his usual crew were unavailable, so he asked for 2 volunteers to assist him on the boat. Jimmy immediately offered to join the hunt, and Clara wanted to go as well, but Bob refused to take a woman on board. Dylan then ordered Sean, the young driver blamed for the earlier crash, to go instead. He told him to see it as a chance to redeem himself. Once they reached the area where the shark was last seen, Bob stopped the boat and began tossing chunks of raw meat into the water as bait. Sean took position with a rifle, while Jimmy helped Bob manage the fishing line. Moments later, the hook caught something heavy. The line went taut, and the pull nearly sent Bob overboard before it snapped. As he replaced it with a new one, the shark surfaced. Sean fired several shots, but all missed. The shark began ramming the small boat, shaking it violently. Bob grabbed his crossbow, scanning the murky water for movement. For a few seconds, the river went still. Then, without warning, the massive shark surged upward, slamming into the hull and capsizing the boat. All 3 men were thrown into the water. As they struggled to stay afloat, the shark circled back. Sean and Jimmy managed to climb onto the overturned boat, but Bob was still in the water. The shark struck again, biting into his arm and pulling him down into the depths. Shocked and terrified, Jimmy and Sean paddled the damaged boat back to shore as fast as possible. When they arrived, Morgan demanded that the team end the operation immediately. He insisted on returning Dylan's advance payment and abandoning the job altogether. Dylan reacted with anger, drawing his pistol and striking Morgan to the ground.
Nothing is over until I say it is. Fucking word anymore.
At that point, Dylan revealed the truth. They were not transporters or traders, but bank robbers on the run. The boxes at the bottom of the river were filled with gold bars stolen during the heist. He warned everyone to stay quiet, threatening that any resistance would end with them being fed to the shark. Realizing escape was impossible, Morgan and Clara decided to cooperate. They built a raft from wooden planks to transport the gold, then devised a plan to distract the shark. Chunks of raw meat would be thrown far from the diving area, while Janusz kept watch from above. Once the shark took the bait, he would signal Clara, giving Morgan and Jimmy enough time to reach the sunken car and retrieve the boxes. As soon as the bait disappeared, Janusz gave the signal. Morgan and Jimmy descended with the raft, following the rope line down to the submerged vehicle. Using a crowbar, they forced open the car door and began pulling out the boxes one by one, tying them securely to the raft. Since there were too many to carry at once, Morgan decided they would need 2 separate trips to bring everything up. While they worked, the water grew restless. The shark returned, drawn by the movement below.
Stay in the van once we've got the sled back up.
It struck suddenly, forcing Morgan to retreat inside the car to avoid being bitten. The raft, loaded with gold, drifted away but got tangled among the roots of a fallen tree. With the shark still circling nearby, waiting was no longer an option. Acting quickly, Morgan left the car and swam toward the trapped raft. Jimmy followed, helping him push it free while Sean operated the winch from above. After several tense moments, the raft broke loose. But at that exact second, the shark lunged again, slamming into Morgan and tearing into his right arm. Blood clouded the water. Jimmy saw the shark bite through Morgan's oxygen hose and immediately removed the weights from Morgan's suit so he could float to the surface. Above the water, Janusz revealed his true nature. He stood motionless, ignoring Clara's desperate shouts for help. Morgan reached the surface still clinging to the raft, but his strength was fading fast. When they reached the riverbank, Dylan was already there. He was laughing uncontrollably, thrilled as he checked each gold bar inside the sealed boxes. Morgan, lying nearby, was bleeding heavily. He needed medical attention, but no one moved to help him. Within minutes, he bled out and died beside the raft. Jimmy, overwhelmed by anger and disgust, finally snapped. He grabbed a knife and charged at Dylan and Janusz. Janusz, full of arrogance, told Dylan to step aside and tossed his gun away, challenging Jimmy to fight with blades. Jimmy didn't hesitate. He threw his knife first, hitting Janusz in the shoulder. Seizing the chance, he rushed forward and drove the blade into Janusz's chest, leaving him gravely wounded. Dylan, enraged at the sight, pulled his pistol and aimed at Jimmy. Before he could fire, Clara intervened, warning that if he killed Jimmy, he would lose his only chance of recovering the remaining gold still at the bottom of the river. Furious but convinced, Dylan lowered the gun and struck Jimmy unconscious instead. By late afternoon, Jimmy and Clara were tied up inside a tent. Jimmy was bruised and covered in cuts from the earlier beating. The next morning, Sean dragged them outside and brought them before Dylan. Nearby, Janusz, still alive but limping, walked over to Morgan's corpse and pried out a gold tooth from his mouth, holding it up mockingly to taunt Jimmy. Dylan then ordered Clara to dive again, forcing Jimmy to remain behind as the surface operator. Cold and calculating, he pushed her back into the dangerous waters. Once everything was set, Clara descended into the river and began retrieving the remaining gold boxes one by one. As the final raft was being lifted to the surface, the shark returned, more aggressive than before. It charged at Clara repeatedly, forcing her to retreat into the sunken car for safety. While inside, she discovered a loaded pistol tucked beneath one of the seats. She kept it hidden in her suit. Moments later, the shark rammed through the trunk. Thinking fast, Clara slipped out through the front door and sealed the trunk behind her, trapping the creature inside. When she resurfaced, the raft with the last boxes had already been pulled up. Clara climbed aboard, quietly hiding the pistol under her clothes. Sean began loading the recovered gold into the truck while Dylan prepared the boat. He ordered Jimmy and Clara to get on board, planning to kill them once they were far from shore. He also instructed his men to bring Morgan's body along. Before they could leave, a police officer arrived at the site. He had returned to investigate reports of Bob, the missing fisherman, who had never come home. The situation turned tense. Within moments, a shootout broke out between the officer, Sean, and Dylan. In the chaos, both Sean and the policeman were shot and killed. The sound of gunfire gave Clara an opening. She pulled out her hidden pistol and fired at Dylan. He ducked behind a nearby vehicle and shot back before running toward his car to grab another weapon. At the same time, Jimmy was caught in a violent struggle with Janusz near the riverbank. Janusz overpowered him, forcing him to the ground and holding him at the edge of the water. Just as Janusz was about to deliver the final blow, Clara rushed in and struck him in the head with a heavy object. The impact sent Janusz stumbling backward into the river, where he drowned. Moments later, Dylan reappeared, hunting for Clara and Jimmy. With no escape route left, they decided to dive into the river and swim toward the opposite bank. Dylan, enraged and desperate, fired wildly into the water, determined to kill them both. Not satisfied, Dylan grabbed Bob's boat and went after them. Blinded by anger, he didn't notice Clara moving in from behind. As Jimmy surfaced, gasping for air, Clara took her chance and shoved Dylan off balance, sending him tumbling into the river. When Dylan resurfaced and tried to aim his gun at Jimmy, Clara dove back in to stop him. She swam toward him, drawing his attention and pulling him farther from the boat. Once he was far enough away, she climbed aboard and started the engine, leaving him behind in the water to face the approaching shark. Without hesitation, Clara grabbed Sean's pistol from the deck and returned to the riverbank. She spotted Dylan struggling to climb out of the water, exhausted but still defiant. Aiming the gun at him, she steadied her hands, ready to end it. Before she could fire, the water erupted. The shark surged upward, clamping its jaws around Dylan's leg and pulling him beneath the surface. Within seconds, he was gone. As silence returned to the river, Clara and Jimmy finally let out a breath of relief. The ordeal was over. The gold, the deaths, and the violence were behind them. Yet one question lingered: what should they do with the treasure left behind? 3 weeks later, life began to settle again. At the diving office, Clara was surprised to find 2 visitors waiting for her. The first, a man in glasses, introduced himself as Morgan's lawyer. He explained that Morgan had left a will naming Jimmy as his heir, entrusting him with all his remaining assets. The gesture reflected the bond Morgan had formed with Jimmy, treating him like a son. The second visitor was the head of the central bank. He had come to personally thank Clara and Jimmy for their honesty and courage. After the chaos, Clara had turned in all the stolen gold, ensuring that every coin and bar was returned to the rightful owners. Thanks to her decision, the bank and its customers suffered no losses, and the dark chapter at the river finally came to an end. So the moral of the story is, if a shark shows up during your illegal gold heist, maybe it's the universe telling you to get a normal job.